Attention bowlers, we're going to get started. Welcome back to Leda Lanes in Nashua, New Hampshire. This is Class B North Round 18. Dan Gray and Paul Metivier. The match format is 5 strings with 14 points. On offer is 2 points per string, 4 for total pinfall. And if there's a tie, the points are evenly split. I'm Steve Kelly on the call for the Atlantic Candlepin Singles Tour. Brought to you by 3-Ball Spare Conglomerate. There's Dan Gray, our away bowler. With a 6-drop. Left side, check mark. 2, 4, 5, 7 for Mr. Dan Gray. To the right of us is also Dino Dellis and Nick Leach. I'm not directly covering their match, but I will keep them in the view of the camera so you can occasionally see what they're up to as well. So Dan Gray misses a spare, and he's shooting for an 8, 9, or 10 box. He'll open up with a 9 here at Leda Lanes in Nashua, New Hampshire. It's good as always to have you along with us. This match was played on Monday, May 5th, 2025, at about 7:10 p.m. local time for the kickoff. Facebook page. Usual place. Yep. So, folks, first, this broadcast should have subtitles and live captioning enabled, so if you enjoy this feature, please feel free to enable it in the controls below. And if you're watching this broadcast on YouTube, the transcript feature will also likely be available. 5-drop and a Kaleri for Mr. Dan Gray. 4 horsemen left in the 9. And on the Kaleri, Dan Gray spares the Kaleri. Great job by Dan Gray, and the first mark and first blood goes to Mr. Dan Gray. Why don't we see that again, shall we? He was right on the head pin, but it was oddly enough to run down all the 4 horsemen and take the 9. That's Dan Gray's spare on the Kaleri in the second, 19 after 2. Here's Dan Gray. 8-drop, 9-drop on the head pin, and a 9 fill. It is only the 3-pin left on the plate of lane 13 for Dan Gray. For the spare, all over it, 2 spares in a row for Dan Gray on the single, 38 in the bonus after 3 for Mr. Dan Gray. There's Dino Dellis as well, who missed 1 pin on his 4 horsemen and a friend. Front camera is a fair distance away from us, and it is a wireless camera, so please do forgive the occasional frame drops you may see on those that may come and go. Dan Gray drops 2 on his spare. That is 40 after 3 for Dan Gray. Dino Dellis threw a 58.5 for anyone who's interested in what just happened over there. Dan Gray almost spares it up, and he does spare it up. Oh my goodness, a 2-drop turning into a spare for Dan Gray. And I don't think I was fast enough on the replay, because I honestly wasn't expecting that to go, but let's watch the rest of the impact on that. Watch the 10 go and watch the 2 go. Dan Gray's spare. Dan Gray fired up 3 marks, and he's only 4 boxes in. Hopefully something better than a 2 fill here for Mr. Gray. Gray skies outside, but sunny skies inside. That's a strike for Mr. Gray. What a statement half. 70 and a bonus. Oh, that wasn't the strike. I pressed the wrong button. So let's check out Dan Gray's half. For the first time this evening, he's at 70 and a bonus after 5. 4 marks strung together in a row for Dan Gray. And I haven't even had a chance to talk about him yet. We'll get back to Dan Gray the next time he's up there. And there's also Paul Metivier, our home bowler this evening. Paul Metivier, who has a record of 125 and 113 with 17 matches played. And he starts off on the head pin, 8-drop, 2-5 for Mr. Metivier. Paul Metivier has a home record at Leda Lanes of 68 and 44, 1.55 win-loss ratio. Paul Metivier opening up with a mark, not to be outdone by Dan Gray. It's 10 and a bonus after 1 for Paul Metivier, and 70 and a bonus after 5 for Dan Gray, with 3 spares and 1 strike all strung together. Here's Paul Metivier. Thin hit, 6-pack. Check his ID. We ID at Keckler's Den at Leda Lanes. Check out the bar while you're here. We'll talk more about Leda Lanes in a little bit And Paul Metivier, he'll miss the object, and he'll leave 3 on the deck. And he'll leave the head pin for a 9 box. 23 after 2 for Mr. Metivier. Paul Metivier has an away record of 57 and 69.83 win-loss ratio on away compared to a 1.55 kill-death ratio at home. Season average 109.61 for Paul Metivier. Home average 108.33 for Paul Metivier, and he's 110.76 while away. That's a diamond 6 drop on the head pin for Paul Metivier. 5-6-3-9. And he just misses everything slightly to the left. Paul Metivier will take 3 of 4 of the diamond. The diamond wins again. That's a 9 box for Paul Metivier, 32 after 3. Paul Metivier has a high single of 144 this season, a high series of 617 this season, 56 strikes, 188 spares, and 187 tens. Achieved so far this season for Paul Metivier. This is his last match of the season. That's a 3 drop and a half Worcester plus a friend. 3, 9, and 5 were dropped. Paul Metivier's on the pocket, takes everything but the 8. And he'll pin it out for a 10 box. Great way to clean up. That's 42 after 4 for Paul Metivier. Compare that to 60 after 4 for Dan Gray. Paul Metivier enjoys a 51% perfect box percentage and 9,317 pins up to this point before this match began. That's an 8 drop and a split for Paul Metivier. That's the 5 and the 10. That's a difficult shot. You got to play the 5 to the left. Paul Metivier knows the assignment, but he just went a little bit too left of the 5. That's a difficult target to hit. Plenty of air to strike, but not the pin, so not so much. Paul Metivier will miss it twice for an 8, and we're already done the first half of the first game for Paul Metivier. He's at 50 after 5. Dan Gray coming back up off the bench, 3 spares and a strike, 70 and a bonus. After 5, he's 3 for 5 in the head pin, so is Paul Metivier. Paul Metivier has 1 split. Well, we have a moment. Here's Dan Gray. So his record is 81 and 143. He's the 4th seed in B North Division 4 and the 14th seed in the wild card overall. So that's an introduction for you to Dan Gray, our away bowler this evening from Portsmouth Bowlerama in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Without further ado, here's the gentleman himself working on a strike, Dan Gray. And he'll drop 2. Coming off the bench for the 2 fill so far. Next ball completes the fill of that strike. And Mr. Gray will take a 6 on his strike fill for 76 and 5. What's he got down there? He's got the 2, the 5, the 8, and the 10. And a 6 box is going to be in the 6th, ending the mark streak. That's 82 and 6 for Dan Gray. Dean Odell is currently at 93 and a bonus after 8. Nick Leach, 60 and a bonus after 5. Wow, both of them are popping off. I did not know they were bowling this evening. Otherwise, would have probably figured out some way to cover both matches, but I'll just give you the verbal updates for their match. Every once in a while. Dan Gray drops 5. 1, 2, 5, 8, 9. Misses the object. Dan Gray having a little bit more trouble on lane 14 than he had on lane 13. He's staring down the 1 and the 8. Missing the object on the second ball. Third ball will be for the 10 box. He's on the head pin there, but it bounces around, and he'll leave 1 on the deck for a 9. That's 91 and 7 for Dan Gray. Dan Gray, again, he has a record of 81 and 143 after 16 matches. .57 win-loss ratio. At home at Bolorama and Portsmouth, he's 52-60 with a .87 win-loss ratio. Away, he's 29-83 with a .35 win-loss ratio. Dan Gray on the head pin there. Pins are still mixing. 6 drop, left side check mark. 2, 4, 5, 7. The 5 and the 7 are wiggling. Dan Gray is a season average of 107.74. Home average 112. Away average 103.48. That's a big difference in averages. That's a 9-point sway between home and away averages, actually. Dan Gray takes all but 1 pin. For the 10, he'll take a 9. 108 for Dan Gray. Dino Dellis finished with a 111 first game. To give you an update back on what's going on in the other 2 pair lanes there. Nick Leach split the 5-7 on his strike fill, and he filled his strike with 9 on the 5th coming off the bench. So he has 69 after 5. Dan Gray, left the head pin, drops 2, takes the 4 and the 7. Dan Gray on the pocket, leaves the 5. Good shot on the second ball. It was a good spare bid. Gray with a 10. That's 110 in 9. So Dan Gray loaded up his first half with 3 spares and a strike. Second half, he's having some trouble getting going, but he's steadily improving from a 6-box to a 10-box in 4 boxes. 4 for 8 on the head pin. No splits for Dan Gray so far. 5.2 average on the first ball so far. Dan Gray is on the pocket there and splits 7. His first split of the match. It's the 7-10-6 for Dan Gray. And he'll take 2, and a piece of wood almost comes over to take the 7 home, but gets sidetracked on the highway. Detour. 7 pin for a 10-box for Dan Gray for a potential 120 game with a 119 guarantee. And it will be a 120 game 1 for Dan Gray. 120 with 4 marks for Dan Gray with a 76 first half and 120 in the second half. So Paul Metivier has to find 70 pins to tie, 71 pins or higher to win. And here's Paul Metivier. 5 go down, 4 horsemen left side in the 10. Nick Leach is at 97 after 8. Dino Dellis finished with a 111 in the first game. Paul Metivier takes 2, leaves 3. It's the high-low jack, the 1-7-10. With a piece of wood far out in front of the 7, perpendicular. Metivier will punch the head pin and leave the 7 and the 10. That's an 8-box for 58 and 6. Metivier tails off to the right, drops 5. 4 horsemen left side in the 10. I feel like we've seen this shot before. Somewhat recently. Metivier misses the object. Instead of a high-low jack, he's now left with the 1 and the 7. Nick Leach is at 110 and counting. And he just spared it. He's at 114 and a bonus in 10. That's a 9-box for Paul Metivier, 67 and 7. So Nick Leach will take the first game against Dino Dellis, in case you're wondering. He's about to fill a spare to finish his first game. 114 and 8. So that should be 122 to Dino Dellis' 111. Back to Paul Metivier. He drops 5. Caleri and a bonus pin, actually. So he drops 4. And Metivier's a little bit thin-ish on the pocket, leaves the 7 and the 9. And to finish it off, he'll take a 9 box. Paul Metivier's at 76 in 8. It's a 4-drop for Paul Metivier. He missed the head pin. Second ball leaves the 6, the 9, and the 10. And he'll take a 10 box for 86 and 9 for Paul Metivier. So Dan Gray, needless to say, will take the first game. Paul Metivier with a triple strike can only get to 116 at this point. So congratulations to Dan Gray by winning by at least 4 at a minimum in the first game. Paul Metivier, half Worcester, left side. He punched out the 2 and the 8. And I'll poke out just a few more beyond that, leaving the 5, the 6, the 3, the 7, and the 10. Paul Metivier's averaged 4.9 in the first ball in the first game. Compare that to Dan Gray's 5.4. And that will be a 6 box for Paul Metivier, and a game 1 of 92 confirmed, 120 for Dan Gray. Dan Gray half head pins so far with 1 split. Paul Metivier 30% head pins. Dan Gray with that 4-mark streak really shot him into the stratosphere with that 120. But we're off to game 2 here on the ACST. The Atlantic Candlepin Singles Tour, broadcasting from Leda Lanes in Nashua, New Hampshire at 340 Amherst Street. You may be wondering why I'm emphasizing that so much, and it's, well, Leda Lanes is going to be undergoing some maintenance and maybe a bit of a move or two. And, yeah, so Leda Lanes is in a bit of a transitional period right now. We are in about the final week and a half of operation at the current location. Leda Lanes is looking to relocate and set everything back up as close to the original place as we could have possibly hoped. Talking with Matt Susi, who's working very hard at, getting everything picked up and moved and put into storage and all that, and some optimistic things from that conversation. So I'm actually kind of excited about that. So I'm sure we'll hear more news about that as we get closer to the updated location and all that, and you know what I mean. But yeah, so we're savoring some of the last few days at Leda Lanes in the original location for 65 years at 340 Amherst Street. Lanes 19 through 36 are already actively being put into storage. So these are lanes 1 through 18, and yikes, that's a Dan Gray out shot, the screw you shot, the 189. Right on the head pin. Dan Gray will take 2 more out. It's the 2, 3, 5, 6, 10. Like a super duper zigzag. That's a leave I don't know if I've ever really seen before, to be quite frank with you. But Dan Gray, who cares? That goes. It's a 10 box. Great out for Dan Gray. 19 after 2 is where we're at for Dan Gray. Dino Dellis of 56.5 all the while at the start of the second game, just to give you a recap of their match. Gonna take down a few notes about their match to see if I can give you some updates coherently. No guarantees, but Dan Gray off to the right of the head pin. That's a 4-drop. Center diamond, the 4 and the 7. Gray will take a few more out, leave the 1, the 2, and the 4. Missed his mark. A 3-pin rundown for a 10 box in the third ball, or the third frame. 7 box it shall be for Mr. Gray. 26 after 3. In case you missed it, Dan Gray threw a 120 in the first game. Paul Metivier threw a 92. Dan Gray is a high single of 148, a high series of 603 this season with 40 strikes, 171 spares, 182 tens, 49% perfect box percentage, 8,619 seasonal total pins. He's the 4th seed in B North Division 4 and the 14th seed in B North overall. That's Dan Gray. Drop 6, 4 horsemen left side, 1, 2, 4, 7. For Mr. Gray, that's the 4 horsemen. And Gray will run down 3 of the 4 horsemen. The 7-pin resists and stands up and fights another day. Dino Dellis with a 56 half. Nick Leach currently at 26 after 2, not counting that last ball. That's a 10 box for Dan Gray, 36 after 4. One frame to go for Dan Gray. Dino Dellis threw a 111 in the first game. Nick Leach threw a 122 in the first game in their match. That's off, slightly off camera. Dan Gray, head pin, split a 7, 5, 6, 10. Dan Gray averaging 5.3 on the first ball up to this point, 15 boxes in. And Gray will play a piece of wood to the left of the 5. It was the right idea, but it just deflected. So Dan Gray will go markless this half. 2 halves in a row markless. And that will be a 7 box for Dan Gray, and that's a 43 half for Mr. Gray. 3 out of 5 of those boxes were headpin shots on the first ball with 2 splits. He's still maintaining a 53% headpin percentage. Totaling 27 in fills, averaging 6.8 per mark. Paul Metivier's off to the right and drops 5. Center pin, pile of pins in the center. Paul Metivier plays the object pin and is a little bit full, but leaves 2 pins on the deck, 2, 5. Clean it up, though, for a 10. Here's Paul Metivier's stats. All the while, he's 3rd place in Division 4 of Class B North and the 8th seed in the wild card overall. That's his positioning. So he has been invited to the dance. He just has to maintain enough points to stay in the dance for the playoffs. 6-10 for Paul Metivier on a head pin, 8 drop. Piece of wood diagonal on the 6 and the 10. I'm worried about that. Just like that. That was the reason I was worried about it. Takes a 6, leaves the 10. That'll be a 9, 19 after 2 for Paul Metivier, who's averaging 5.7 on the first ball. That's 0.4 more than Dan Gray's first ball cumulative average up to this point. Nick Leach threw a 64 half. Compare that to a 56 half for Dino Dellis, all the while in the second game for them. That's a 9 drop for Paul Metivier. Leaves the 6 pin. Metivier on a single. Oh, and he gets a very lucky, merciful spare. 29 and a bonus after 3 for Mr. Paul Metivier. Dino Dellis currently at 101 and counting an 8. And he missed his mark there. So he's going to be at a possible 103 and 8. To give you an update there. Paul Metivier on the head pin. Splash of 7 and a split of 7. 4, 6, 7. Paul Metivier misses the object. Gets 1 consolation piece of wood. Or 1 consolation pin, courtesy of the piece of wood. 3, 7, and he'll take the 7 for a 9 box. 45 and 4 for Paul Metivier. Dino Dellis, our away bowler for the matchup against Nick Leach. Dino Dellis from Boutwell's Bowling Center in Concord, New Hampshire. Nick Leach from Leda Lanes in Nashua, New Hampshire, coming in as a mid-season substitute bowler for Dave Hodge-Mallahan. 1-3-6-9 for Paul Metivier, who missed the head pin, dropping 6 on lane 13. He spares that mess up. And that will be a half for Paul Metivier, 55, and a bonus of a half, to be specific. 6 for 15 on the head pin, 40%. 2 marks this half, 3 for 5 this half, with 1 split this half. And welcome back. Here's Dan Gray. You got a 192. And it was a 5 drop for Dan Gray. One diamond, 7 pin. And oh, how is the 5 pin surviving that? Are you kidding me? That was unbelievable. Unbelievable luck for that 5 pin. That 5 pin does not deserve to be standing right now. Dan Gray hit the pocket, took everything out. Diamonds have an uncanny ability to win. That's 53 and 6 for Dan Gray. Mr. Gray from Bolorama in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And he'll half Worcester a 2 drop on the 3 and the 9. So when you punch out the 3 and the 9, or the 2 and the 8. Quarter Worcester is if you just take the 2 or the 3. Check out a 3-ball spare on YouTube in a couple of days. I'll have a rather humorous short of an Easter classic moment where I threw a quarter Worcester followed by a half Worcester. I'll have that YouTube short coming out in a couple of days. It'll be a fun little romp. And that's all but the 5 pin for Dan Gray on the 3rd ball for 9 box, 62 and 7 for Mr. Gray. Dino Dellis threw a 117 in the 2nd game, just to catch you up on what's going on adjacent to us. Nick Leach with a 73 half is currently at 101 and 7 and counting. 8 drop for Dan Gray. That's the 4 and the 7. The piece of wood across it, and it's not tilted like Paul Metivier's was, but Dan Gray doesn't even need to play that wood. He'll take a spare. That is 72 and 8, and he just remarks he didn't like that wood, so he didn't play it. Here's that shot again. See? Just completely sidestepped the issue entirely. Dan Gray at 72 and a bonus in the 8th. Here's Dan Gray on the head pin with a 6 fill and a split. 7-10-5-9. $112 after 8 for Nick Leach. And what a nice shot by Dan Gray, though. Excellent, excellent shot. I think I got it on a replay. Here we go. Watch this. 5-7-10-9. Goodbye. Wow, that was a great spinny kind of aerial move. Great spin move, as they call it in football. Dan Gray, oh, I heard an That's a 2 fill. You don't like to hear an He tailed off to the right. 6-10 drop. 90 and 9. Gray on the pocket. Oh, and he takes all with a 7. Great recovery. Just no dice. Just a bunch of Parcheesi pieces instead of dice. It's 121 and 9 for Nick Leach, though. He's on a tear. That's a 9 box for Dan Gray, and that's 99 for Game 3. It's a 2-game total of 219 for Dan Gray with that 99. 2nd game with 2 marks towards the end. Dan Gray is 10 for 20 on the head pin with 4 splits, so it's a 50% head pin completion percentage. Here's Paul Metivier again, who's working on a spare. Nick Leach is at 127 and counting. He'll take the 2nd game in addition to the 1st for Dino Dellis. There's a 4 fill for Paul Metivier all the while. Not even a split. 1, 2, 6, 7, 9, 10. Poke another. That's a 128 game 2 for Nick Leach, beating Dino Delis' 117. Both bowlers over there bowling out of their minds. And that's going to be a 6 box for Paul Metivier, 65 and 6. So Dino Delis threw a 111 and a 117. Nick Leach threw a 122 and a 128. Again, I didn't know they were bowling this evening, but they started around the same time as us, so I actually can loosely follow the action on them, just without the fancy scoreboards and all that, but just have a little scratch pad just writing their scores down every now and then. I'll give you updates as they happen, or if I remember to give you them. Metivier drops 7, 6, 9, 10, pokes the 9, leaves the 6 and the 10. And he'll take a 10 box for 75 and 7. He's up over Dan Gray's 62 and 7. Could use a few marks, though, to maintain that pace, but he had 2 marks in the first half. Dino Delis is at 9 after 1 in the third game. Paul Metivier drops 5. It's not a Kaleri. 1, 2, 4, 7, and 8. Sometimes you can mistake this for a Kaleri, but it's technically not a Kaleri. He'll take the 2 and the 4, leave the 1, the 7, and the 8 on the deck. Lane 14. Oh, and a nice 10 box for Paul Metivier, 85 and 8 for Mr. Metivier. Paul Metivier is second place in B North Division 4 in the 7th seed in Class B North overall. He has 8 matches totaling at or over 550 in grand total pinfall. He has 1 match this season at or over 600. He has 2 of his 17 matches with shutout victories, 14 points. And 9 of his 17 matches have been double-digit victories, double-digit point take-home. Metivier drops 5, drops 6. It's the 1, the 7, the 10, and the 4. High-low jack and the 4. Paul Metivier on average goes 25.7 for 50 on the head pin and 12.5 splits per match. His home house is here at Leda Lanes in Nashua, New Hampshire. In Paul Metivier's past 5 matches, he's taken 42 points, averaging 8.4 points per match. In his past 5 matches, his total pinfall has been 28.02, averaging 560.4 on the grand total pinfall per match. That's 9 box for Paul Metivier. That's 94 and 9. Paul Metivier has 15 out of his 17 matches totaling at or over 500 in total pinfall. He has his longest streak of matches at or over 100 being 12 this season. And 7 matches is his current streak of being over 500 before falling under that. And Metivier will split 4. Bucket of 5 and the 7. Yikes. Dino Delis is at 24 after 3 in the third game. Metivier takes 4 of the 5 on the bucket, leaves the 5 and the 7. Metivier will take a 9. No, he'll take a 10. That's great pinning and great wood action for Paul Metivier. That's a 104 game 2, excuse me. 196 2-game total for Paul Metivier. He'll take the second game by 5 against Dan Gray, who threw 99. So each bowler has 2 points apiece so far. The total is still in Dan Gray's favor by 23 as of right now. That's the story after 2 games. 50% head pins for Dan Gray, 40% head pins for Paul Metivier. And welcome back. We're in the third game. You're watching the Atlantic Candlepin Singles Tour. I'm Steve Kelly calling Dan Gray versus Paul Metivier, and kind of auxiliarily calling Dino Delis and Nick Leach every once in a while. Dino Delis at 34 after 4. That's a 3 drop for Dan Gray off to the right, missing the head pin. Dan Gray almost gets a backdoor spare, leaves the head pin. Almost a Julian spare. A Julian is a term that apparently means when the head pin is the last to fall. Often used to describe a Julian strike, but we can tweak that a bit to call it a Julian spare, but that's a nice regular 10 box for Dan Gray. 10 after 1. So yeah, we're at Leda Lanes. We are at the soon-to-be quote-unquote old location at 340 Amherst Street in Nashua, New Hampshire. Since 1959, with 36 lanes, 65 years of operation. WNDS Candlepin Stars and Strikes was here. It hosted Men's Worlds 2024 last year. And that is a lemon drop for Mr. Dan Gray. That's a first ball punch out of the 4 of the 6 pin. That's a $1 donation to Candlepins per cancer. And it's a $5 fill if it's on a mark. But it wasn't, so it's just a 1 for Dan Gray. Looks like 2 more out on the left side. Take the 4 and the 7. He leaves the center diamond, the 8, 9, and 10. Gray will make a 7 box out of that mess for 17 after 2. That's a 43 half for Dino Dellis, as Nick Leach is working on his first frame. Currently, Nick Leach took the first 2 games against Dino Dellis. Nick Leach threw a 122 and a 128. Dino Dellis threw a 111 and a 117. Dan Gray. The right of the head pin pokes out 2. Pokes out the 6 and the 9. Dan Gray averaging 4.2 on the first ball. Up to this point, 10 head pin shots for 23 and 4 splits. Dan Gray will take a few more out, 1, 7, 10, and 3. Nick Leach with a wiggling pin. I'm just hearing Dino yelling in the back. He goes, come on. Nice 10 box for Nick Leach there. Oh, no, a spare, excuse me. And there's, Dan Gray on the second ball. He leaves the high-low jack. The TV shot. A 1, 7, 10 leave. But that will be a 7 box for Dan Gray all the while. 24 after 3 is his total. So far, hey, a nice strike by Nick Leach. I know you couldn't see that, but I physically saw it. Nick Leach is at, what, 39 after 3 and a bonus? Yeah, nice. That's a 5 drop for Dan Gray. Center diamond in the 4. Gray will poke the 5 and the 3. 1, 2, 4 on the plate. The next pitch is the 3rd ball of the 4th frame for a 10 box, 7 box guarantee for Dan Gray. We'll take 2 of those 3 for a 9 box for 33 after 4. Dan Gray has 6 matches this season at or over 550. 1 match at or over 600. So both Paul Metivier and Dan Gray have thrown at least one 600 series match. It's a 7 split for Dan Gray on the 5, the 7, and the 8. Nick Leach at 47 after 3. Dan Gray on the second ball leaves the 5 and the 7. Ball 3 will be an 8 for Dan Gray, and that's going to be a 41.5 for Mr. Gray, and a 2.5 game total of 260 for Dan Gray. Paul Metivier with a 2 game total of 196 will now be returning to the approaches to see how he answers. Here on the ACST at Leda Lanes in Nashua, New Hampshire. Class B, the final match of the season for Paul Metivier, the second to last match for Dan Gray. Metivier to the right, drops 7. It's the 1, the 3, and the 9. At the half, it's 47 and a bonus for Nick Leach, and 43 and a bonus for Dino Dellis at the third, halfway through the 3rd game for them. Metivier misses the mark. He leaves the 1 and the 9. Then the 3rd ball, he takes the 9, leaves the 1. That's a 9 box. 9 after 1 for Paul Metivier. Just playing a little bit catch up here. Hold the thought on that for a moment. That's a 9 drop for Paul Metivier. Leaves the 5. There's a comment from Casey McCool in the comments saying, "Have you ever played disc golf before?" I have played it once. I have a friend who is also named Steve. It's Steve Abodeely. Actually, he does some of the photography for my streams. He plays a heck of a lot of disc golf in Manchester and in other places. So be on the lookout for another person I know named Steve who plays disc golf. And I know he's been in several meetings in Nashua talking about the new disc golf course in Nashua in particular. That's a fill of 6 for Paul Metivier. Right? I didn't dream that up? Yes, 25 after 2 for Paul Metivier. And he spares it up again, though. Whatever that was, it don't matter. It's gone. Let's watch this. Goodbye, Diamond for Paul Metivier. Shine on. Yeah, that's a Pink Floyd reference in case you don't know. And for Paul Metivier, he's dropping pins. He's still dropping pins, and he's going to get a split credit for that despite not hitting the head pin. That's a 7 fill, I believe. That's what it's going to be. 4-10-8. Yeah, disc golf is fun. It's if you like golf or mini golf, it's like that, but with frisbees, and you throw it into a basket, and it's kind of fun because a lot of the trails are like through woods. And it's kind of a fun thing. It's sort of like a nature trail, and but look at that spare, though, for Paul Metivier all the while. Man, Paul, you just can't let me talk, can you? Let's watch the spare by Paul Metivier on the 4, the 8, and the 10. It goes. All right, before I was rudely interrupted by the 3rd mark in a row by Paul Metivier. Yes, disc golf is quite a sport. It's like half nature trail, half sport, but it's really competitive at the same time. If you're into precision sports like bowling and golf, you'll like disc golf. So welcome to the official Candlepin Bowling Disc Golf live stream, I guess. That's a 6 fill for Paul Metivier, by the way, and he misses the mark on the 2nd ball, so the streak ends there. And he'll take a 9. That should be 67 after 5 for Paul Metivier, if I'm not mistaken, and yes, it is 67 indeed. 41 after 5 for Dan Gray. Paul Metivier is averaging 5.8 on the first ball. Cumulatively up to this point, 25 boxes in. Dan Gray, 4.7 on the first ball. 10 for 25 in the headpin for Paul Metivier with 4 splits. 11 for 25 in the headpin for Dan Gray with 5 splits. And here's Dan Gray. To the right of the headpin, he drops 6. That's a 1-16 game 3 for Dino Dellis, by the way. Just to get you caught up on what's going on in the other lane. Dan Gray misses his spare opportunity, leaves the 1, 2, 4, and the 8. He'll poke 1. That's a 7 box for Dan Gray. 48 after 6. Dan Gray on the headpin, split 6. Triforce of Power in the 7. That's the 3 diamond plus the 7. 3, 5, 6, 7. And there, goodbye to the Triforce of Power and the 7 for Dan Gray. Great shot. We watched Anthony Leonardi make this recently. Actually, on 3 ball spare, there's a short of him making this exact shot, but just the mirror image of it. And now Dan Gray gets a crack at it, and he succeeds. Look at that. Awesome wood action there. And he's going to fill that spare right now. Ooh, it's going to be a 2-drop and a half Worcester for Dan Gray. Half Worcester, a punch out of the 2 and the 8 or the 3 and the 9. And it was on a fill. And 2nd ball takes, well, a couple more pins out. That's about the best I can say about that. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10. Oh, and he'll leave the 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 for a 5 box. 65 and 8 for Dan Gray. Leda Lanes hosted the Easter Classic and has hosted the Easter Classic for, I want to say there were 35 of them as of this year. And the Easter Classic will be back when Leda completes its move, so be on the lookout for that. And if you want coverage of the latest Easter Classic, multiple Candlepin Bowling streaming channels, I've got you covered. I streamed the entire day of the Easter Classic on 3-Ball Spare from the perspective of where I was bowling, and had a bunch of great bowlers all around me, including Justin Waters, JJ Trigny, the occasional Chris Bover, Dominic Palladino, and a whole other cast of people that I'm just not remembering right now. My apologies. 74 after 9 for Dan Gray. And Candlepin Bowling Network also covered the Easter Classic from multiple angles with multiple other folks, so do check out all that coverage if you want to see Leda Lanes stretch to the limits in terms of a full house of bowling for 13 straight hours. That was the Easter Classic this year, 2025. The past couple of Easter Classics have been completely full, so the tournament has only been getting more popular, not less popular, and that's great to see. Dan Gray misses his mark. That's the 1 and the 8 on the deck for a 10 box, and he's looking at a potential 84 Game 3. And he'll take an 8. That'll be 82 in the third for Dan Gray, and a 3-game total of 301, averaging right around 100. Paul Metivier at 263 after 2.5 games. Dan Gray has gone down to 40% in the head pin, 12 for 30 with 6 splits. Paul Metivier 10 for 25 in the head pin with 4 splits, pending his next 5 boxes to see. We'll check out the difference in the totals and whatnot. Currently, Paul Metivier is only down by 15 in this game, and he has 5 boxes to recover that deficit. 5 drop, 1, 2, 4, 7, 10. And it's a 129 Game 3 for Nick Leach, so he'll take the 3rd game from Dino Dellis as well. Glad I just remembered to catch that because it was just right on the end screen for them. So currently, Nick Leach sweeping Dino Dellis. 122, 128, 129. Dino Dellis, 111, 117, 116. And there's Paul Metivier. He'll leave the 10 on the deck for a 9 box. That's 76 and 6 for Paul Metivier. It's 344 for Dino Dellis and 379 for Nick Leach. Nick Leach nearly throwing a 400 just now. Just a couple of pins off. That's a 6-pack and the 7 for Paul Metivier, so that's a 3 drop. And he's a little bit thin on the head pin. Turns into a bucket of 5 shot. Nice 10 box for Paul Metivier and a great recovery. That's 86 and 7 for Paul Metivier. He will take the 3rd game as of the 7th box. Paul Metivier 4 points, Dan Gray 2. Not factoring in the grand total pinfall just yet. Dino Dellis remarking with those 3 losses. Oop, is that going to be a strike for Paul Metivier? Yeah, all right. That was a slow one, but it went. I don't even know if my replay buffer caught all that. Let's watch. Oh, yeah. Nope, too slow. Thank goodness. Didn't expect that to fall. That's a strike for Paul Metivier. Yeah, Dino Dellis said he was potentially in the running for the playoffs, but losing 3 in a row to Nick Leach just now, that might have just knocked him out. As he is at the bottom of the wild card. He's sort of in the same situation as me right now, because I'm effectively in the same situation. So actually, him dropping actually might help me now that you mention it. So I'll keep that in mind when I bowl Nate Lees on Wednesday night at Exeter for Class A, my last match. 8 and 9 for Paul Metivier. That's the 8 fill on the strike for 104. And then with that 10 box, that brings him to 114 and 9. Dino Dellis just scored a nice spare on the 6, 9, 10 triangle. Starting out their 4th game, Paul Metivier on the pocket. Drops 6. That's the 3 diamond. Paul Metivier is 13 for 30 on the head pin with 5 splits. He'll miss the diamond spare, take 2 of the 4. Dan Gray is 12 for 30 on the head pin with 6 splits, so they're comparable in terms of head pins and splits, only a difference of 1 for both of them. It's a 9 for Paul Metivier, and he'll finish the 3rd game with a 123. And that is confirmed. 319 for Paul Metivier. 301 for Dan Gray as of 3 games of Candlepin bowling with 2 games of Candlepin bowling to go. Here on the ACST, both bowlers struggling a little bit on the head pin in particular, but we'll find out what happens here. Dan Gray wanting to waste no time, actually even catching me off guard a little bit there. He'll drop 5. Dean O'Dell's rocking 34 after 2, meanwhile, with 2 marks. And that's a nice spare for Dan Gray, though. Watch this. Center diamond and the 7. Dan Gray takes it. The wood all plays nice. That was kind of a merciful spare. It was looking dicey there for a moment. Here comes Dan Gray, working on a spare fill. And that's 7 on the fill on a split. Dan Gray averaging 5.4 on the first ball. First ball average is a cool stat that Matt Susi was discussing and pointing out on the Cubic AMF automatic score system here, and he was talking about it a lot one night, and I said, you know what, I should start including that in the stats here, so I added that to my scoreboard. I don't have a visible indicator just yet for it, but just kind of giving you the verbal updates. Maybe next season I'll have that figured out. That's a 10 box for Dan Gray, 27 after 2. Dino Dellis is currently pulling 53 after 4 plus a bonus. And he just threw a strike. Dino Dellis, holy moly, he's at 73 and a bonus after 5, saying, now I'm going to show up after losing 3 games. That's a split for Dan Gray, though. That's a diamond and the 4 and the 7. It's a 4 drop. Weird 4 drop at that. Dan Gray will cut the diamond 3/4 of the way and leave the 4, the 6, and the 7. And Dan Gray will opt to just get pins, and he'll take 1. That's an 8 box. And the 3rd for 35 after 3. He's 2 for 3 on the head pin, and both of those head pin shots been splits this game. Yeah, Dino Dell is throwing a monster first half of the 4th game. He's at 73 and a bonus after 5 with 3 spares and a strike. It's a bucket of 5 shot for Dan Gray on the head pin. Oh, and he'll kick the 5 to take a couple extra pins I didn't expect to go down, but not all of them. 3 and the 9 are left. Dan Gray shooting for an 8, 9, or 10. Oh, that was a misfire to the left. He'll take an 8. That's 43 and 4 for Dan Gray. Yeah, Dino Dallas, 111, 117, 116. Nick Leach, a 122, a 128, and a 129. And they're working on their 4th game right now. Dan Gray on the pocket. Drops 9. He's averaging 5.4 on the first ball. It's a 9 drop, and he leaves the 2. Dan Gray on the spare, and goodbye. That's gone. Bookending his half. Dan Gray's at 53 and a bonus after 5. That is confirmed. Spare at the beginning and a spare at the end of this first half of the 4th game for Dan Gray. Currently at a 3.5 game total of 354. And here's Paul Metivier. On lane 13. Goes to the right. 6 drop. Would have been a Caleri if the sleeper didn't decide to take a hike. It's a 1, 2, 4, 7, 4 horsemen for Paul Metivier. And he'll run down 3 of the 4 horsemen, but he started on the 2nd one, leaving the head pin. And Metivier will take a 9. 9 after 1 for Paul Metivier. I think. Yes. No, he's just taking a Second to reset. Paul Metivier, his longest winning streak of greater than 7 points per match has been 3, averages 8.5 points per home match and 6.33 points per away match. It's a strike for, holy moly, 76 and a bonus for Nick Leach. He caught right up to Dino Dellis. Dino Dellis is at 73 and a bonus after 5, and 76 and a bonus for Nick Leach. They're both on strikes. Holy crap. That's a 6 drop for Paul Metivier. Misses the spare. I'm calling both games. There's an NFL announcer who definitely said that once. That's an 8 box for Paul Metivier. 17 after 2. That's a headpin shot and a split for Paul Metivier. A drop of 7. That's the 4, 6, and the 10. And this split's a doozy. Metivier, I don't know if he was opting for a trick shot or if he was just looking to cut his losses, but he went for the 6 and the 10 and took the 6 and the 10. So he's going to pin it out for a 10, but he misses the 4 for a 9. And that's going to be 26 after 3 for Paul Metivier. Dino Dellis currently at 92 after 6 and 98 after 7 with the conclusion of that box. Excuse me, 98 after 7. Paul Metivier, a light hit, missed the head pin, but pins are still dominoing down, and that's a 1 and a 2 leave for Paul Metivier. And, well, Paul Metivier hit that weird, and a piece of wood kind of flew out of the plate and flew back into the plate. Hit the 2 kind of hard and wiggled it, but it didn't fall. It's the 9 and the 10 for Paul Metivier. He takes a 10. That's 36 and 4 for Mr. Metivier. Dino Dellis just threw another mark in the 8th, and he's at 108 and a bonus in 8. So he's going to be in the 1-teens by the end of the 8th frame. I'll let you know if things get explosive over there. Paul Metivier drops 7. Back left triangle of the 4. 4, 7, 8. Paul Metivier in his past 5 matches, he's taken 20 strikes, 56 spares, and 54 tens, averaging 4 strikes per match, 11.2 spares per match, and 10.8 tens per match in the past 5. In his past 5 home matches, Paul Metivier has taken 52 points, averaging 10.4 per home match in his past 5 home matches. That's an 8 for Paul Metivier in the 5th, 44 after 5 for Paul Metivier. Dan Gray is currently at an advantage, 53 and a bonus in the 5th. Paul Metivier has the total by 9 minus the fill from Dan Gray, and Dan Gray is ahead by 9 plus the fill, whatever that ends up being, starting in just a moment here. Dan Gray working on a spare. Lane 14 on the 1-2 pocket. It'll be a delayed split of 7 after all settles. Oops. Briefly pausing to score correct that because of a late falling pin. The automatic score system just has some trouble with late falling pins, as you can imagine. Entropy and unexpected action is the name of the game in Candlepin bowling. Dan Gray almost spares that mess. Piece of wood comes for the 10, but it goes behind it. 116 game 4 for Dino Dellis. That's a 9 box for Dan Gray all the while. No, excuse me, 136. I can't read. 136 for Dino Dellis in the 4th. Scoreboard is very far away, so My glasses are good, but not that good. 136 game 4 for Dino Dellis, so we'll see if Nick Leach can match that. And he has a good chance of doing it. That's a 6 drop for Dan Gray. Right side check mark, 5, 6, 3, 10. Dan Gray a little bit off to the right. It's a 3, 5, 6. And here's Dan Gray, a bit of a stutter step there. I don't know what happened there, but that's a 7 box, leaving the Triforce of Power, the 3, 5, 6, 76, and 7 for Dan Gray. He's perfect on the head pin except for the first box this game with only 3 splits. He's 18 for 37 on the head pin overall with 9 splits. He's averaging 5-point first ball on the first 5.4 pins on the first ball up to this point. 6 drop, missed the head pin. It's the 1, the 5, the 3, and the 8 for Dan Gray. Nick Leach has crossed 100 after 7 boxes. And that's a nice, don't hurt him kind of shot for Dan Gray. Let's take a look at that, because that was great to watch. Look at that, just a light tap on that head pin on the Brooklyn side. And everything just negotiated downward. 86 in a bonus and 8 for Dan Gray. Dan Gray working on a spare, and he's slightly to the right of the pocket. But he'll get an extra pin out of it. That's a 5 drop. 4 horsemen left side and a sleeper. 91 and 8. Nick Leach is at 109 and 8. Compare that to Dino Dellis' 114 and 8. Dan Gray's got the 147 on the mark shot. Missed the mark, and there's a pin that might be out of play. It's rolling and accelerating towards a channel. Hopefully it makes it there. Yes, it has. 147 for Dan Gray on lane 14. He'll take 2 and leave 1. That's a 9 box for Dan Gray and a 100 even in 9 frames for Dan Gray. In the 4th game, he's at 401, 3.9 games in, 39 boxes in. Dan Gray, let's talk more about Dan Gray. He has 0 out of 16 matches with shutout victories, but he has 3 out of 16 matches with double-digit wins. He goes 23.08 for 50 on the head pin on average. That's a 3 drop for Dan Gray. Oops. Hello. There we go. Dan Gray goes 9.92 splits per match on average. His home house is Bolorama in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. In his past 5 matches, he's taken 35 points, averaging 7 points per match. In his past 5 matches, he's taken 2,638 pins, averaging 527.6 per match. He has 13 out of his 16 matches at over 500 in grand total pinfall. That's a 7 box for Dan Gray. Let's assess what's going on with Dan Gray. 408 after 4 games, so a 107 game 4. And that was a 126 for Nick Leach. So, hey, Dino Dellis does take a game. At the end of the 4th for Dino versus Nick. So that's 480 for Dellis after 4 and 505 for Nick Leach after 4. That's a 6 drop and a split for Paul Metivier. Paul Metivier, the 4 and the 10 are left on the deck. Paul Metivier versus the 4 and the 10, and he'll make it a 9. 53 and 6 for Paul Metivier. That's a split for Paul Metivier, a 7 drop and a split. That's the 4, the 6, and the 10. Metivier plays the wood rather awkwardly, takes the 6-10, leaves the 4. And he'll make it a 9. That's 62 and 7 for Paul Metivier. And, all right, well, this is going to be an interesting situation. I'm not calling their match, but Nick Leach with 505 after 4 is actually on 600 watch right now. So if he just throws effectively a 100 fifth and final game, he'll have a 600 or another 600 on his record. Just to give you an update. That's a 6 drop for Paul Metivier. And he'll spare it up. That's a nice spare for Paul Metivier. 72 in a bonus in 8. Metivier on a spare fill on the head pin. Takes 7. Breaks the front of the diamond right off. That's the 4, 5, and 8. 79 and 8. And this shot, I don't know what to make of this shot. You're going to have to kick the wood that's in between the 5, the 6, and the 8. One side is to kick forward to take the pin you do not hit. And that was not the wood I was talking about. Dino Dallas 26 after 3. Says very quietly, but I heard he says, I love this game. It's just the way he said it. That was just really funny sounding. 87 and 9 for Paul Metivier with that 8 box. Bowling is fun. Paul Metivier on the head pin. There's a strike, a definitive strike for Mr. Metivier. And if I can get my ducks in a row here, I'll get you a replay. Watch this. It was a quick one, so don't blink. Watch this. On the Brooklyn side, the 1-2 pocket. Explosion of pins. The best kind of strike. No debate about that one. He's filling a strike now, Paul Metivier is. 97 and on the pocket. Similar kind of ball, but he only takes 8 this time. It's funny, the same kind of ball can yield different results, and that's the entropy of Candlepin bowling. 5 and 8 for Metivier. Lane 14 for a spare. Well, 10 fill, more so. That's a 107. Game 4 for Paul Metivier. 426 after 4 for Paul Metivier. 408 after 4 for Dan Gray. Paul Metivier currently with... Oh, you're kidding me. Actually, they tied 5 points for Paul Metivier. That's why it took me a second to realize what was going on. Yeah, 107 to 107, Dan Gray, Paul Metivier. So they will tie game 4. And, yeah, wow. Oh, got a tie out of it. So, anyways, I don't know why I wasn't paying attention to that. So, yes, they're tied 107-107 in the 4th game. 408 for Dan Gray, 426 for Paul Metivier. Dan Gray misses his mark there. After 5 in the 5th game for Dino Dallas, he threw a 41. Nick Leach starting his 5th game, who's on 600 watch. 480 for Dino after 4. Dino Dallas. Nick Leach after 4, 505. That's an 8 box for Dan Gray. Meanwhile, back in this match. So Dan Gray's longest streak of strings at or over 100. This is a notable stat. 13 games in a row at or over 100. 7 matches in a row at or over 500 is his best streak this season. I always like to take those stats between the two bowlers because it's kind of fun to see who has the better streak. Because every once in a while you can have one that just breaks the combo. Dan Gray almost takes a spare there, leaves the 4 and the 7. Dan Gray's longest winning streak of greater than 7 points per match has been 2 this season. He averages 3.63 points per away match and 6.5 points per home match. That's a pretty big sway. And that'll be a 9 box for Dan Gray. In Dan Gray's past 5 matches, he's thrown 16 strikes, 45 spares, and 53 tens, averaging 3.2 strikes per match, 9 spares per match, and 10.6 tens per match in his past 5 matches. Dan Gray will poke 2 for a half Worcester on the 3 and the 9. Dan Gray averaging 4.9 on the first ball up to this point. Half Worcester. He'll take a few more out on the left side, overcorrecting a little bit. Mr. Gray makes it an 8. 25 after 3 for Dan Gray. Dino Dellis 41 after 5, halfway through the 5th game. Nick Leach 24 after 2, and he's about to be 33 after 3 or 34 after 3. He's at 34 after 3 now. Compare that to Dino Dellis, who was at 26 after 3. Dan Gray on the left of the head pin. 1, 5, 3, 8, 9, 10. 4 drop. Gray, bouncy ball, a little off target. Off to the right. Gray for a 10. Almost makes it a 10, makes it a 9. 34 after 4 for Mr. Dan Gray. Dan Gray in his past 5 away matches has taken 25 points, and that's an average of 5 points per match. In his past 5 home matches, he's taken 32 points, averaging 6.4 points per home match. He has 13 out of 16 matches without double-digit wins. His last time versus Paul Metivier, he took 4 points, and he has the 20th highest Class B average at 107.75, and there's a split and a spread eagle for Dan Gray, the traditional academic spread eagle. We saw Ed Sargent make the spread eagle for the spare this past Sunday at Boutwell's Bowling Center in Concord, New Hampshire. And that actually was the same side of the split that Ed Sargent converted it for, but Dan Gray hit the left side of the 3-pin there, a little bit full. And Dan Gray will take a 9 out of that eagle. He'll go markless, a 43.5. 4.5 gain total of 451 for Mr. Dan Gray. Paul Metivier coming off the bench, 426 after 4 with a 92, 104, 123, and 107. Dan Gray in the first 4 games, 120, 99, 82, and 107. And here's Paul Metivier. On the pocket. Good shot, but dropped 8, split 8, 5-10. And Nick Leach is at 53 and a bonus after 5. He has a spare on the 5th. Dino Dellis starting his second half of the 5th and final game. Nick Leach is at 558 after 4.5 games. That's a 10 box for Paul Metivier, 10 after 1. I'll remark it's 558 plus a fill ball for Nick Leach. Metivier will take 3 off the back left corner on the first ball. Leaves this 1 diamond and the 6 triangle. Dino Dellis is at, I think, 60 after 7. They might have to score correct that, look by the looks of it. Maybe. And there's a 10 box for Paul Metivier all the while. That's 20 after 2. Metivier starting the 3rd frame. He's a little bit off to the right. Dropping 6. Paul Metivier. In his past 5 away matches, he's taken 20 points, averaging 4 points per match. 8 of his 17 matches have been double-digit victories, and last time versus Dan Gray, he took 10 points. There's a spare for Paul Metivier. Perfect this half so far, 30 and a bonus after 3. Paul Metivier has the 10th highest, 10th most strikes in all of the ACST at 56. He has the 4th ACST North total strikes at 56. There's a 7 on a spare, by the way, on the head pin. That's the 3, 6, and 10. Paul Metivier is the 15th highest Class B average at 109.55, and the number 2 Class B total strikes at 56. Metivier hits the object, but only takes the object. No second spare in a row. Paul Metivier will pin it out, though, and stay perfect for 47 after 4. Paul Metivier recently faced John Alosa in round 17 in an away game at Boutwell's Bowling Center in Cochrane, New Hampshire. He threw a 551 series with a 104, 88, 119, 113, and a 127. He took 4 points in that match against John Alosa with 2 strikes, 14 spares, and 11 tens. Here's Paul Metivier on the headpin. Bucket of 5 on the right side. Just narrowly ahead of Dan Gray in the 5th. Dan Gray has 3 points so far because they tied the 4th, and Dan Gray took one of these games. The first game with a 120. Dino Dellis is going to finish with a 113. Just to give you an update of what's going on over there. That's a 7 box for Paul Metivier. Let's assess the situation between Gray and Metivier. That's 451, 4.5 games in for Dan Gray, and 480, 4.5 games in for Paul Metivier, who has the total by 29 and the game by 11. Here's Dan Gray, wasting no time. Drops 6 on the head pin. Dino Dellis finishes with a 593 series, just 7 pins shy of 600. He almost got there. To give you a idea on what just happened over there, Dan Gray will take a nice 10 box. And that's 53 and 6 for Dan Gray. So Nick Leach also on 600 watch, but he's a little bit closer to it than Dino Dellis was. Dan Gray drops 7, split 7. It's the 5, 7, 8 for Dan Gray. Dino Dellis threw a 111, 117, 116, 136, and a 113 for a 5-game total of 593. Nick Leach so far has thrown a 122, 128, 129, and a 126 for a 505 4-game total. He's currently at 79 after 7. If he just gets to basically 95, he has a 600. There's a nice 10 box for Dan Gray. Missed the second, get the third. Some might call that a Paul Grant special. It's a bucket of 5 and the 7 for Dan Gray, and that's a 3-drop. No, sorry, 6-pack and the 7, 3-drop. Right name, right number, wrong name. Dan Gray leaves the 1, the 5, and the 2x2 grid, the 1, the 3, 5, and the 9. Dan Gray punches hard down the center and leaves the 3. And he'll take a 9. That's 72 and 8 for Dan Gray. Dan Gray, who's currently 3 for 8 on the head pin with 2 splits, currently at 480 and counting with 2 boxes to go. 21 for 40 on the head pin with 11 splits. Paul Metivier 22 for 45 on the head pin with 9 splits. Dan Gray averaging 5 pins on the first ball. Paul Metivier 5.5 on the first ball. 7 drop for Dan Gray there. Missed the head pin, but still a decent lead with a 1, the 2, and the 9. Dan Gray, spinny ball, connected with the 9, bounced around, spun around, hung around the 2, and then is still down there, actually. It's still spinning. Still spinning. It's going to stop between the 1 and the 2. So we're probably going to have to pause to sort that out. That ball is very awkwardly placed. It is almost impossible to remove something like that. So I don't know what's going to happen there. We'll find out, I suppose. In fact, can I get a close-up prepared here? Yeah, let's watch this up close. There's a ball in between the 1 and the 2. Paul Metivier's going to have to do some surgery down there and not touch a thing other than the ball. Look at that. And I think we had a successful surgery thanks to Paul Metivier. Oh my God. In the rule book, you can't have a ball be on the plate and throw another ball because a ball is not a pin. It's in the rule book. Can't have it. Makes for some interesting extractions. That's a 105 game 5 for Nick Leach. So that's a 610 for Nick Leach. Dino Dellis 593. Nick Leach 610. Dino Dellis took only the 5th game and not the total. Dino Dellis took 2. Nick Leach took 12. That's a 10 for Dan Gray. Dino Dellis 111, 117, 116, 136, 113. Nick Leach 122, 128, 129, 126, and 105. 593 Dino Dellis, 630 Nick Leach. Nice job, Nick Leach. Excuse me, 610. What am I saying? 610. Correction, 610. Math is difficult right now for some reason. 6 drop on the first ball for Dan Gray. Misses the spare on the 4 horsemen. Takes 2 of the 4 horsemen. The middle horseman leaves the 1 and the 10. And that'll be an 8 box for Dan Gray. And that'll be a 95th game and a 5-game total of 498 for Dan Gray. I'd like to thank Dan Gray for coming out. He said it was his first time back at Leda Lanes in at least 20 years. So, and I told him, I'm glad you made it out here before Leda Lanes closes. In the last week and a half of operation here before Leda Lanes reopens at a brand new location. So just thought I'd give a shout out to Dan Gray for having a nice chat with him about that. And that's Paul Metivier to the right of the head pin. That's a 4 drop. 1, 2, 7, 10, 6, 8. And Metivier will leave the 2 and the 8. And it'll be an 8 box. 62 and 6 for Paul Metivier. Paul Metivier recently, last time he faced Dan Gray in round 3, he threw a 109, 144, 113, 95, and 122 of the 583 series. He took 10 points with 5 strikes, 15 spares, and 7 tens, 22 headpin shots, and 9 splits. And that was nearly a strike shot for Paul Metivier. He drops on the headpin and leaves the 7 on the plate of lane 14 at Leda Lanes. And thanks, Dino, for confirming those numbers, because I was squinting really bad at looking at a very teeny tiny scoreboard with teeny tiny numbers, and I'm glad to know I got the right numbers. So cool. Well, it was fun to call a game and a half without knowing who was going to be a second match next to me. Would have had a more advanced array for that, but just didn't know. Literally walked in knowing that match was going to happen. So Metivier on the 6th fill, 78 and 7. And that's all but the head pin for Paul Metivier for the spare shot. So he's looking at an 88 and 8 if he can take the head pin, or an 87. 87 is going to be 87 and 8 for Paul Metivier. Compare that to 72 and 8 for Dan Gray. Right now, Paul Metivier already has the total, and he's 3 pins away from the game. So I think he's going to take 11 points. I think he's going to take 11 points. Yep. It's a 5 drop for Metivier in the 9th. 4 horsemen right side and a sleeper. Paul Metivier averaging 5.5 on the first ball. Dan Gray finished with an average of... Ooh, nice spare for Paul Metivier, though. Dan Gray averaging 5.1 on the first ball. Let's look at that shot again by Paul Metivier. The 1-3-6-10-9. On the, well, mostly Manhattan side of the head pin. Kind of more full than anything else. That was a nice spare. So he's working on a spare now. He has the 5th game. He will take 11 points. Paul Metivier will confirm take 11 points. 7 fill on the head pin and a split. Paul Metivier final first ball pins down. Cumulative averages for the 50 boxes in. For 50 boxes in is 5.5. Dan Gray 5.1. There's a spare for Paul Metivier, putting an exclamation point on his night. And his season, for that matter. This is his last regular season match. 114 and counting, 540 and counting for Paul Metivier. Final ball of this match. of the evening. That's a 5-drop and 119. Game 5 for Paul Metivier for a 5-game total of 545. Dan Gray with a 498 5-game total. And that will be it. So head pins, 48% Paul Metivier, 24 for 50, and 21 for 50 for Dan Gray, 42%. 11 splits for Dan Gray, 10 for Paul Metivier. And 2 strikes for Paul Metivier, 1 for Dan Gray, 11 spares for Paul Metivier, 9 for Dan Gray. Paul Metivier took the total by 47 and took the 5th game by 29. Let's assess the final stats here. Here we are, 11 points to Paul Metivier this evening to finish off his season and possibly put him in a better spot for the wild card playoff picture in Class B North. Dan Gray will take 3. And Dan Gray will, for the evening, average 100. Paul Metivier will average 109. And those are the final stats. Paul Metivier really popping off and taking off, particularly after box 40. He just could not be caught from there on out. Dan Gray put on a promising picture at the beginning, but right about the end of the second game, that was when Dan Gray kind of started falling off a little bit. They were intertwining a little bit in the middle, but then Paul Metivier just took off like a rocket. So anyways, that is the story of the match this evening. So before we go, I'd just like to say a couple thanks to our ACST committee members, including our Commissioner Danny Finn, our Class B Treasurer Corey Lisi, and hey, why not, our Class A Treasurer Rich Lamone, since a Class A match happened right next to us. Our ACST statistician Micah Imparato, the staff at Leda Lanes as always, and we wish them the best of luck as they embark on the journey for finding a new location and getting everything neat and put away in storage and all that while Leda Lanes goes into hibernation for a little bit. I'd like to thank Steve Abodeely for some of the B-roll and photography you've seen this evening. Check out his work at stabodeely.com. That's STABODEELY.com for his additional work. I'd like to thank viewers like you for watching. I always appreciate you watching in any way, whenever, however. That'll be about it from us today at 340 Amherst Street at Leda Lanes in Nashua, New Hampshire. Check out all these fine other channels if you just can't get enough of Candlepin Bowling content, such as Candlepin Bowling Network on YouTube. There's at Candlepin Bowling on TikTok, at Candlepin Corner on YouTube, the Atlantic Candlepin Singles Tour page on Facebook, the central hub for all ACST action. There's my channel, of course. There's 3 Ball Spare Conglomerate on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. That's my channel if you want to check me out wherever I'm at. I'm doing a YouTube short a day right now, and I'm currently pacing to have plenty of those scheduled for the near future here. Also check out all these other fine channels such as Candlepin Chat on Facebook, alleychat.net, as well as alleychat on YouTube. There's Wolfman12395 for classic Candlepin TV shows, and there's also the Candlepin Bowling channel on YouTube. They do the same kind of thing. There's also some other folks such as Tony Levesque and Charlie Collins on YouTube and TikTok, respectively. There's the Ripping the Rack podcast on YouTube and the Approach podcast on Facebook. And yep, we already talked about me. And check out Candlepins, number4cancer.com, and Candlepins for Cancer, the great charity by Al Johnson and Paul Grant. They just wrapped up thetheir ladder series at Boutwell's Bowling Center in Concord, New Hampshire. Check that out on Candlepin Bowling Network to see who wins the ladder at the very end. And there's also tournaments to sign up for. You can sign up for if you just want to donate, whatever you want to do. Just check it out all out at Candlepins, number4cancer.com. If you like bowling and want to go bowling, live in the area, get in the car and go. Go to candlepin.org. You don't have to get into a car to go to candlepin.org, I hope. But go there to find your center and then go by clicking Go Bowling on the website first. Order of operations. Not all centers shown on the map. There's one in Albany, New York. Anyways, that should just about wrap it up for us here at Leda Lanes. For Dan Gray and Paul Metivier, I've been Steve Kelly. Hope you guys have a great one, and we'll see you at the next Atlantic Candlepin Single Store match. Have a great one, everyone.